Before I begin my sermon, I just want to reflect for a brief moment over what happened last Wednesday. Most all of us were glued to our television or the radio for a good bit of the day when Representative Steve Scalise and a lobbyist, Mike Micka, were so gravely wounded. The good news that we can report this morning is that Representative Scalise's condition has gone from being critical to serious, and that's good news. Similarly, though, Mike Micka has been severely injured and remains as such, but also remains steadfast in our prayers. Legislative aid was shot at the same time as were two Capitol Hill police, David Bailey and Crystal Griner, who turned out to be the heroes of the day in being able to stop this. I don't suppose that you've had to been around for too long to think back and say, well, this has happened before. And indeed, it was not too terribly long ago, 2011, when Gabby Giffords was shot. And in kind of an odd twist of history, on that particular day when the world was holding their collective breath for Representative Giffords, it was Representative Scalise who went into the House of Representatives and stood there and gave a very passionate appeal for people to hold her in prayer. And now we were doing the same thing with respect to him. It's a terrible thing. Gabby Giffords, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, JFK. The list goes on and on. President Reagan, President Ford twice, but the gun misfired. Harvey Milk, Governor Wallace, George Lincoln Rockwell. You just go down the entire list of people who have been the subject of attempts on their lives because primarily their politics or the way that they think. I am always, on an occasion like this, as you know, because we've talked about it a lot from this pulpit, wanted to offer solutions. And the reality is, sometimes those solutions are a little above my pay grade. And I wonder, why has not the House of Representatives and the Senate basically done nothing since Sandy Hook? And if 20 little children dying that day doesn't move them, what possibly can? And then it occurred to me that they are called representatives for a very good reason. They represent us. And every once in a while, it is incumbent upon us to be such a beacon of hope and a beacon of light that naturally what glows from us, what flows from us, what comes from us, compels them to maybe act a little differently. And that's not to suggest guilt upon us, because if it's guilt, then we all ought to go home and just be hopeless. But what it does suggest is that there is possibility inherent in every single one of us to make a radical and decisive difference in the life of the world. And if you think about that, and then you think about the gravity of this whole thing and the fact that 30-some people are murdered every morning or every day in this country. 3 times that many wounded in assaults. When you think about that, you kind of wonder, are we up for it? And the reality was, I was finishing my sermon just prior to hearing this news on Tuesday morning. I had gotten up early. And the sermon itself, in an odd way, I think speaks exactly to the idea of, is there hope? Are we the people who in fact can be a shining beacon that will cause a new day to come among us? And so basically, I added 6 words to the sermon and print, and here's what we have today to maybe give us a sense that we're going to be okay. This sermon is about something that happened a long time ago. And it's based on a storyline that I first heard from a wonderful Franciscan monk. His name was Brother Robert Hugh. And we had him in the Diocese of Utah floating around to parish for about a month during Lent. And he finally wound up at St. Mark's Cathedral in Salt Lake City, where I was the curate at the time. I've never forgotten what he said. So, with a little rhetorical license, I want to repeat the gist of that storyline some 30 years ago, and then, to some extent, repeat some of what I added to what he said and shared with you 12 years ago. Chances are none of you remember that, because I didn't remember it, to tell you the truth, until I saw the Gospel of the Day, and that particular thought popped into my head. Brother Robert began by saying that years and years ago, the angels gathered around the Father as he was contemplating the way the world would work and who would run the show. And one of them reminded the Father that there was some good talent out there. There were great thinkers that had come forth in history: Plato, Aristophanes, Socrates, Aeschylus, and the like. They would be good. Another spoke of those who had the command of persuasion, because you were going to have to go out and move people from one place to another. Surely Cicero, Aristotle, Quintilian came to mind. Mathematicians, rhetoricians, scientists, physicians, teachers were named as candidates for the Father to consider. And yet the Father's thinking was obviously elsewhere. There was this funny look in his eyes. And he said to all the angels who were gathered around him, "Do you see that field over there? You know, the one that's by the lake, with all those nondescript people kind of standing around? I'm going to pick them." "Those people?" the angels asked in disbelief. "Yeah, those people." "But my God," if you'll excuse the expression, no offense taken, answered the Father, "you have to be out of your collective Trinitarian mind. Do you have any idea who those people are? Peter is nuts. And when the rubber hits the road, I'll bet you $20 he denies your son. And then you have Thomas. There's a guy that has the conviction of a potted plant. Matthew, the tax collector. Oh, good. I suppose no one from the mafia was available? Now throw in a couple of fishermen, and what a group you've gathered. And need I say anything about Judas Iscariot? Well, exercising some sense of patience, the Father looked at the angel and said, "Those are the ones I want. I want them. I'm going to make them the church's apostles." And the angels all went back to the angel's grange and grumbled about what a poor choice God had made when it came to picking those who would somehow spread the news if anything were to happen to Jesus. Well, at that point, the shop steward of the angel said he just couldn't believe what he was hearing, and he himself went to God the Father and he asked, "So why these guys? Come on, really? They're all I've got," said God. "They are all I've got to work with, so they're it." And so for a very, very long time, the president of Local 236 of the Amalgamated Heavenly Host and the Father just kind of stared at the scene below and watched it work out. God was right. The pickings available to God were just ordinary people. That, in so many words, was what this monk told us that day in his sermon about the picking of all those who were listed in the gospel that we just heard. That's how they got there. It was a stunning story, obviously one that I remembered. But I think there's more to it than that, and I do so because you just can't drive back and forth for an hour each way every single day to All Saints without something popping into your mind that's grounded in the holy. So now jump ahead with me just a couple thousand years from where the monk left off. Not very much is different. God is still God, and the president of the Angels Union is still the same fellow, now in his second term. And per the contract, it's time for the review that has to take place on the Father's performance. And so in the unity of the Trinity, the Father begins by saying, I think the church has done all right. What do you think? I mean, when you look at it from soup to nuts. And the angel replies, not bad, but what are you going to do now that the world seems to be in such a mess and more explosive in ways that we could never have imagined 2,000 years ago. I mean, dear God, you have trouble in the Mideast, you have trouble in Persia, you have trouble on the Korean Peninsula, not to mention you have heartburn just reigning in the United States around healthcare and taxes and the environment and another shooting of another congressman. As a result, I need not tell you, some folks are losing their faith. And a lot of people are losing their faith in the government that they have. And to that the Father says, well, not unlike before, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. It always seems that way, doesn't it? Well, that doesn't answer my question, said the angel. What are you going to do about all these lost sheep down there? Look at them all. Who possibly can do the work that you have been calling people to do? Who's going to somehow turn the world around by word and example, by thought and deed, by guts and the hope of glory? Who's going to do that? Who are you going to pick this time? Well, do you have anything in mind? Challenged the Father to the angel. And he said, oh, of course. There's a brand new crop of Nobel laureates that's just come out. They're great. And it's being spring. We have a bunch of graduates who are looking for jobs. And of course, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton always like doing things together. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that they raised over $54 million in response to the earthquake in Haiti. That was only 7 years ago. They're ready for a run again. They'd be good. And then, of course, there's Edinson Volquez of the Marlins. Did you see he threw a no-hitter against the Diamondbacks 2 weeks ago yesterday? He'd be fabulous. Well, those are good folks. You'll get no argument from me, said the Father. But you know what I really need are some people who can go into the world day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, filled with the sense that together they can go out and make a difference. A wonderful difference. Well, where are you going to find them? Asked the angel. You're asking a lot of a world that is filled with imperfect, finite, limited, and sinful people. And not to say I told you so, but I did say something around the time of creation about the risk of giving people freedom, didn't I? But did you listen to me? No. Not really paying much attention to the angel, the Father had this funny look again on his face, and he said to the crowd gathered around him, anyone ever been to Montana? Look down there, just north of that big lake, on both sides of the Blue Moon Saloon, where some of you behaved a little bit raucously there in times past. We need to have a little talk about that, but not now. You see those two towns? And then you see that city that's kind of to the south of it and all the other towns and villages around it. Do you see those towns? And then you see those folks who go to All Saints Church, you know, that crazy dog and cat place where they have that reputation for dogs and cats? I think I want to stick with them. Them? You've got to be kidding, said the angel. Didn't you learn from your lesson of appointing Matthew and Peter and Andrew and James and John and the rest? I mean, they were a little fallible on times. And while I don't know the people in the parish, Northwest Montana certainly does have its share of screwballs running all over the place. And need I remind you about the priest and his falling off the ladder thing? How bright could he possibly be? You have got to do better than them. Well, thankfully, said God the Father, I know what I'm doing. I think they're going to continue to do just fine. And besides, when you get right down to it, the truth is, they are all I've got to work with. Notwithstanding all of the problems that you mentioned, Gabriel, you know as well as I do that because I am faithful, they're going to actually do just fine. Labor negotiations and performance evaluations can sometimes be a bit tough and can even go on for days and days. That's probably happened before in heaven, but this time it was a little different. After what seemed like a very brief exchange, both sides just took a deep breath, faced forever and ever, and thought it best just to charge ahead. And so they all said, Amen, and promised to meet again sometime in eternity to see how things worked out. And that is, I think, why you and I today find ourselves in this particular ministry at this very unique time, which can also be extraordinarily troubling. And if my understanding is not exactly descriptive of the conversation God and the archangel had, I think we still can have confidence, because God only knows. God only knows. And in that, we are not just going to be okay, we're going to flourish. Amen.